In this beginner-friendly Blender tutorial, I will show you how to create these stylized pumpkins. So this tutorial is very beginner-friendly, so I'll be going very slowly, and I'll be showing you all the buttons I'm pressing and showing you all the shortcut keys. And if you are a complete beginner to Blender, then you might be interested in checking out my Blender for Complete Beginner tutorial series, and throughout the tutorial series, we create this snowman character. So fall of 2025 is here, so I thought it would be fun to create a fall themed tutorial. You can also check out my fall and autumn themed tutorial playlist to watch more of my fall themed tutorials. Now I'm also going to provide the project files as a free download on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page, so if you do want to download the project files to go into the Blender file and see how I created things or use it as study material or whatever you want, you can download it for free with the links in the video description. Now if you would like to send me a little tip, then you can throw in $1 or $2 into the price box on Gumroad and purchase it to help support the channel, but it is also completely free. So here we are in a new scene in Blender, and I am going to have my screencast keys here in the corner so you can see what buttons I'm pressing during the video. So I'm going to start by hitting the A key, so hit the A key to select all the objects, and then we're going to delete it by just hitting the delete key, and that's going to delete everything. So now let's add a new object for our pumpkin. So you can either hit Shift A for the add menu, or you can click up here on the add menu, and we want to go to mesh, and then let's add a UV sphere, because that's going to be the basic shape of a pumpkin. So now what I can do is I can press the period key on my numpad, and that's going to zoom into the object. Now, the default scale of objects are actually pretty large, so the default objects in Blender are pretty big. So I'm going to scale this object down by hitting S to scale, and then I can type 0.2, and then I'm going to hit enter. So that's going to make it a bit better size. I'll just zoom into this with the scroll wheel because the objects on default in Blender are actually pretty large. Now I want to make this the new default size of the object, so I will hit Control A to bring up the apply menu, and I'm going to apply the object scale. So now this is the default size of the object. So of course pumpkins have like those little creases, and also the top of the pumpkin and the bottom of the pumpkin kind of go inwards. So I want to edit the shape of the mesh. So you can click on object mode and you can go to edit mode, or you can use the shortcut key by hitting tab. So we'll hit tab to go into edit mode. So now we can edit the vertices. Now if you hit the A key, that's going to deselect and select the mesh. So just hit A to select everything, and it's selected. You can see it's orange, that means it's selected. And I want to squish the pumpkin down a bit. So I'm going to hit S to scale, and then I'm going to type Z, and we're just going to squish it down just a little bit, and then just click there to confirm that scale. Now what I want to do is I just want to scale the vertices right here down in, and also the same thing for the bottom vertices. So click with your middle mouse wheel to orbit around, and I'm going to zoom in here with the middle mouse wheel, and I'm going to select this vertex. Then I'm going to middle mouse wheel and click and drag down to see the bottom, and then I'm going to hold down the shift key and select this vertex. So by holding down the shift key, we now have the top vertex and the bottom vertex selected. So now I want to scale them, but you can see that if I scale this, it's not really scaling the vertices around our selection. So let's hit the escape key. What I'm going to do is click right up here to turn on proportional editing. So now if I hit S to scale, I can hit Z, and that's going to scale everything on the Z axis like we've done before, but you can see because the proportional editing is turned on, the vertices next to it are going to move up and down. So the vertices which are nearby are also going to move around and be affected. Now if you scroll your mouse wheel, that's going to change this little circle here, and that will change the size or the strength of the proportional editing. So if I scroll the mouse wheel way down, the proportional editing is very small, or if I bring it up, more and more the mesh is going to move along with it. So I'll just scroll my mouse wheel down like this, and then I'll just bring it down a little bit. You can maybe click to place that right there. So now the bottom and the top both come in. And maybe if it's too big, I could scale it up a little bit. So hit S and then Z to scale it back up like that. Now what you could also do is select a loop here. So to select a loop, you can hold down the Alt key and then select. And that's going to select the entire loop. If you click right here or click where the vertex is, it might select a loop up and down. So hold down the Alt key and click right down there on one of those lines. And then for example, I could hit G, and G is going to grab the mesh. Then I could hit Z to bring it up and down the Z axis, and I could maybe bring it down slightly like that. I'm going to select this center vertex again, and I'll hit G to grab, and then I'll hit Z to bring it on the Z axis, and I'll just bring it down even more, like that. And there is the basic shape of the pumpkin. However, we do want to create those vertical creases. So what I can do is hold down the Alt key and then select a loop here. Now let's navigate to top view, and you can actually hit the 7 on the number pad to go to top view. Or if you have the little gizmo here, you can click and drag around to see the gizmo. If you don't see the gizmo, you can click on this little icon here to see the gizmo. And if you click on the top Z, that is going to take you to top view, or you can press the 7 on the numpad. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down the Alt key and start to select these loops here. And I want to select the loops all the way around. But I want to select multiple loops, so as well as holding down the Alt key to select a loop, I'm going to hold down the Shift and Alt key, and that way we can select multiple loops at once. So we're going to click here, let's maybe go 1 over and then click there, and then maybe go 2 over and click there, and click there, and just kind of select some random loops. So some of them are going to have 1 space in between, some of them might have 2 spaces in between, just like that. And also click there, maybe this one here and that one, and then also that one. So I'm going to click with my middle mouse wheel and kind of zoom out here. So you can see we just have some random loops, and I want to scale these in. So I'm going to hit S to scale, and we're going to scale them all down. And then again, if you scroll your mouse wheel, that's going to change the size of the proportional editing. So if it's bigger, it's going to pull more of the mesh with it. If it's smaller, it's not going to pull as much of the mesh. So I'm just going to scale everything down just a little bit, maybe like that, and then click to place that there. And then if you hold down the Shift key and click with your middle mouse wheel, you can pan up and down or pan side to side to kind of center the view. All right, so if we hit Tab to go back to object mode, or click here and go back to object mode, that's starting to become the shape of a pumpkin. Now before we continue, we should save our Blender file, so let's click on File and click on Save. And that is going to bring up Blender's file browser, and you can locate somewhere on your computer, maybe like the desktop or a folder where you can save your tutorial project files. And right down here you can type a name. So I can type in pumpkin and hit enter. So it's going to save it as pumpkin.blend as a blend file, and I will click on Save Blender File. Now as we're working on the project, you can hit Control S to save the project. So there is a big problem with this pumpkin, and that is that everything looks really blocky, because you can see there are all these blocky faces here. So I want to smooth this out by using a modifier. So we're going to modify the object. So if you click here on the modifier properties, which is the wrench icon, we can click on add modifier, and then we can click here on the search, and I can type in SUB for sub, and we can click on subdivision surface. So the subdivision surface is going to add more topology or geometry to the mesh, and it's going to start to smooth it out. Now on the modifier settings, you can see there is a viewport level, which is how much it's going to be in the viewport, and then there's actually the render level, which is how detailed it's going to be in the render. I'm going to click on the arrow here in the corner to turn it up to 2 so that it's a little bit more detailed. So now you can see there still are those little blocks there, kind of those flat faces, but they're more smooth. Now to smooth the object, you can right click, and that'll bring up the object context menu, and you can choose shade flat, which we have right now, but I'm going to choose shade smooth. So if we shade that smooth, you can see that's starting to look a lot better. But there's still a problem, and that is that kind of in the creases, if we hit Tab to go into edit mode, the creases here which we made are still very smooth, and I want those to be a bit more sharp. So we're going to add more geometry where those creases are. So if you go into edit mode by hitting Tab or click here and go to edit mode, we still have those loops selected. So I'm going to press Control B. So kind of zoom in closely and then press Control B, and you can drag your mouse up and down, and you can see it's going to add another loop next to that loop. So Control B is the shortcut key for adding a bevel. So what you can also do is hold down the Shift key now as you're dragging your mouse, and it's going to make your movements more sensitive. So I'm just going to make a really tiny bevel and then click to place that there. So because we have more loops there, if I hit Tab to go back to object mode, you can see now the crevices look a lot more sharp, and so the shape of the mesh is much more defined. So that's definitely looking more like a pumpkin. Let's hit Control S, or you can click on File and click on Save to save the project. So I now want to add a new object, which is going to be the pumpkin stem. So we'll zoom out with the scroll wheel, and we'll hit Shift A, or you can click here on the Add menu, and we can go to Mesh, and we are going to add a cylinder. Now you can see that's why I zoomed out, because the cylinder is going to be quite large when we add it. Now before we do anything with the cylinder, I'm going to click on this little add cylinder setting right behind me. So this will show up right after you add the cylinder, and we'll just open this up and you can see there's going to be the vertices here. And so that's going to be like the resolution of the cylinder. So I'm going to type in 14 and hit enter so that there are 14 loops there. And I will now close the add cylinder settings by clicking on the arrow. And let me just drag the timeline down because we don't really need it. So now the topology is a bit lower and that's better. Now the object is really large, so I'm going to scale it down. So we will hit S to scale, and then I'm going to type 0.03 and enter. Or if you want to, you can just hit S to scale and bring it way down, just make it really small and then click there. And let's zoom into the object by scrolling in, and then we'll hit G to grab and bring it up on the Z axis. So hit Z. So hitting Z will constrain it to the Z axis so it can only go up and down. And then we could scale it down a little bit more. And now we want this to be the new default size of the object. So we can hit Control A and we are going to apply the object's scale. And then you can hit the period on the numpad to zoom into the object. If you are kind of over here and you want to zoom into an object, the other way to do this is by clicking on View, and you can click on Frame Selected, or use the period key on the numpad to zoom into it. So now I want to edit the shape of this to make it look like a stem. So I'm going to hit the 1 on the numpad, which is going to go to front view, or using the gizmo, you can click on the little -y here. So click on that dot and it will go to front view. The other way to navigate with the views is to hold down the Alt key, and then you can middle click and drag over. So if you hold down the Alt key and then middle click and drag either to the left or the right or up and down, that's going to move around your views. So we're on top view or front view or side view. But another easy way to do this is to just click on the -y to go to front view. So we're going to select the cylinder and we'll go from object mode over to edit mode. Now what I want to do is select the vertices, but I want to select the vertices on the back as well as the front. So we need to go into wireframe view. So if we hold down the Z button is going to bring up these pie menus. So you can move your mouse over to wireframe and then you can let go of the Z button. Another really easy way to remember this is that you can just click right here. So if you click on this little circle here, the filled in circle, that is going to be solid view. But if you click on this little one with kind of the lines there, that is going to go into wireframe view. So it's kind of like an X-ray view. So now we can hit A to deselect everything. Now you might need to double tap A to deselect everything. And we can just click and drag, and that is going to add a box, and we can just box select the top vertices. Or you can press the B key, and the B key is going to go to the box select, and you can click and drag and select the top. So let's now hit R, and R is going to rotate the selection. Now I want to hit escape to undo this because we have the proportional editing turned on. So I'm going to click on this button here to turn off proportional editing. And now I can hit R to rotate, and I'm going to rotate it over a bit. And then I'm going to hit G to grab and move it up a bit and click there. And then I will hit S to scale it, and we'll scale it down a bit. So R is the shortcut to rotate, S is the shortcut to scale, and then G is the shortcut to grab or move. So now what I want to do is extrude out these faces. So I'm going to hit the E key, and the E key is going to extrude out our selection. So it's going to basically make the cylinder longer. So we'll click there, and then we will hit S to scale, click there, and then R to rotate, and G to grab. And then what we can do to pan over is hold down the Shift key and click with our middle mouse wheel to zoom over here, and we will extrude this out again. So hit E to extrude, and we'll click there, and we're going to scale it. So hit S to scale, make it a bit bigger, click there, and then we can hit E to extrude again, and we'll click there. Then we'll hit E to extrude again, click there, and then we'll hit S to scale and make it a bit smaller. So that's going to be the top stem. So let's now pan by holding down Shift, and we're going to click with our middle mouse wheel and move down here. So now we're going to deselect everything by hitting the A key twice to deselect everything, and we're going to hit the B key for the box select, and we're going to click and drag and box select the bottom vertices there. And then we can Shift and middle click and drag to pan. And now let's hit E to extrude, and we're going to extrude it down here, and we're going to click there, and then we will hit S, and that's going to scale it up. Let's scale it up pretty big, and let's also hit G to grab, and we'll bring it up on the Z-axis and bring it up a little bit. Then we're going to hit E to extrude it again and bring it down, and then we're going to hit S and scale that up. So let's now hold down the Z button, and that is going to bring up the pie menu. We're going to move our mouse to solid view and then let go of the Z button. Or you can click here from wireframe over to solid view. So now we'll click with our middle mouse wheel to zoom around here and see it. And you can see there is a face there on the bottom, but I actually want to delete that face. So we're going to hit the delete key, or you can also hit the X key. And it's going to show us a menu for what we want to delete, and we want to click on faces, and that is just going to delete that face there. So now it's hollow inside there. So let's hit tab to go back to object mode, or you can click here and go to object mode, and then you can click on file and just save the project again. And now what we want to do is scale everything down. So hit S, and then we want to bring everything down. So we're going to hit G and Z, and we're going to bring this right down there. And then we'll scale it down again, bring it down a little bit more. So S to scale, and then G to grab, and then you can hit Z to move it up and down on the Z axis. So now what I want to do is basically create a little star shape around the stem. So you can hit the Z button by clicking there on the gizmo here, or you can type 7 on the numpad to go to top view. And we are going to go back to wireframe by clicking here on the wireframe button, and then we can go from object mode over to edit mode. So we are now going to press B again for the box select, and we're going to select some of these vertices right there, and then we'll hit B again, drag those 2 vertices, hit B again, drag those 2 vertices, and then if you zoom in here, what we can do is hold down the shift key and select that vertex and that vertex just by selecting it. You can also go back into solid view, and then you can select it by moving down here, and then you can go back into wireframe and then select that vertex and that vertex. And then we will click and drag with our middle mouse wheel, and let's shift and click with our middle mouse wheel to pan down. And we can select that one, and then that one and that one. So if I hold down the Z button and go back to solid view, or click on the solid view button, you can see we have every other loop selected. So now we'll hit S, and that's going to scale them down, but I don't want to scale them on the Z axis. I just want to scale them in sideways. So after I hit S, I'm going to hit Shift Z. So Shift Z is going to basically get rid of the Z axis. So it's going to scale it in on the X axis and the Y axis, but not the Z axis. So we'll just bring it in and just place it there. So now you can see we have like a star shape. Now what I'm going to do is select the other loops, and we want to scale them out. So an easier way to do this is to click right up here in edit mode on this little line button, and that is the edge select. So now we can select edges. So I can now select this edge right there, and we want to hold down shift and select that edge, and that edge, and that edge, and that edge. And then if we let go of the shift key, we can just middle click and drag. We want to select that edge and that edge. And we can press the period key to zoom into our selection. And we can scale all of these out. So we'll scale them out like that. So we'll now hit tab or click on edit mode and go back to object mode. So I now want to smooth out our object. So we're going to click on add modifier like we've done before. And we're going to type in SUB, and we're going to add the subdivision surface, which is going to smooth it out. And then just like we've done before, we want to turn the levels viewport here to 2. So click on the arrow to turn it to 2. Then we want to shade the smooth again. So if you just right click, you can click on shade smooth. Now I do want to make it a little bit thicker and kind of sharpen up this. So let's go back into edit mode by hitting tab. And I'm going to add a loop cut, which is basically one of these loops here, and we're going to add it in the center here. To add a loop cut, you can press Control R. So when you press Control R, it's going to show you these yellow lines, and that's where you can add a cut. So I'm going to click here to add a cut, and then we can drag the cut to the top or the bottom. So I'm going to drag it down and then click there. And then I think what I also want to do is hold down the Z button and go into wireframe view, and let go of the Z button. And I want to also click on this button to go back to the vertex select. And I'm going to hit the A key, double tap A to deselect everything. And I'm now going to press B, and I'm going to click and drag to box select all the bottom here. And then I'm going to scale it on the Z axis. So hit S and then Z, and we're going to flatten it. All right, let's go back to the solid view by just clicking here, or you can use the pie menu. So it's just a little bit more flat. So we're scaling it on the Z axis. And then one more thing that I want to do is kind of round this over a little bit more. So what I can do is hold down the Alt key, and we can select that loop. Then we can use G to grab, and we can just move this around so that it kind of curves over. So let's now go from edit mode back to object mode. And we can click on file and we can save this. So the modeling of the pumpkin is finished, so I'm now going to do some lighting. So let's click here to go to the render properties, and we're going to go to the render engine, and the Eevee rendering engine should be on default, but if it's set to a different one, let's change it over to Eevee. And then we also want to do is click on this ray tracing button, and that's going to make the Eevee rendering engine look more realistic. So now I want to go into the rendered viewport mode so we can see what it looks like in the render. So if you hold down the Z button, you can see here's the rendered view. So let's move our mouse up and then let go to go to the rendered view, or you can also click on this little button right here to go into the rendered view. Now everything looks really gray right now, and that's because we don't have any lights. So if we click on this little button here, which looks like the earth, that's going to go to the world properties, and you're going to see this color here. So if we click on the color, it's going to show you a color palette, so we can make it brighter, and then we can also make it kind of like an orangey brown color. Now another thing that I want to do to the lighting is let's go back here to the render properties, and I'm going to scroll down to the very bottom, and there's going to be a color management tab. So if we open this up, the view transform, on default this might be set to AGX. You can leave it to AGX if you want to, and this is like the color management, so it's what the colors are going to look like. So it's basically sort of like a color correction option. Now you can use AGX if you want to, but I'm going to change it to filmic because I think that just filmic looks a little bit better. Personally, I just like it better. Now here is a look, and so we can change this look to make the colors more vibrant, and so it's again a little bit of color correction. I'm going to change this to very high contrast, so it will pop out the colors and make things more contrasted and saturated. So now I want to add some lights. So what we can do is go to the add menu, and we can go down here to the light tab, and I'm going to click on area light. So the area light is this big square light. So I'm going to navigate my view to the side, and then I'll hit G to grab, and we're going to move the light over, and we'll click to place it there. Then we can hit R, and R is going to rotate the light. Another way to rotate it is to click on that little yellow dot there, and you can kind of drag the light around. Let's navigate here to the front, and then I will hit G to grab, and we'll move it over here to the side. What we can also do is hit R to rotate, and then we can hit Z, which will rotate it on the Z axis. So we're going to have a light here kind of on the side, and so this light is called a rim light because it's adding that nice little light there on the side of the object. So by adding a rim light, you can see the shape of the object a lot better because you can see there's that light reflection there on the side of the pumpkin. Now, if you select the light and click over here on this little light bulb setting, this will go to the object data properties of the light. And there's some different settings. So for example, you could click on this color and you could drag it around to change the color of the light. I'll just leave it as white. And then you can also change the power. So if you turn it up, it's going to be stronger. So I'm going to type into the power 30. So just click on the power, type 30 and hit enter. Now I want to add one more light on this side. So we want to make the same light over here. So to duplicate it, we can hit Shift D. So Shift D is the shortcut to duplicating it, and we're going to move it over and then click to place it there. Now we can click on this little light button here, and we can click and drag and just rotate this over to the other side, and maybe zoom out and click with our mouse wheel to move over and maybe drag it back a little bit so it's not quite as bright. So now you can see we have some rim lights on either side. Now I also want to add one more main light just to brighten everything up. So if we navigate over here to the side, we're going to hit Shift D. That's going to duplicate it one more time, and we'll click there. And then we're going to rotate it, and let's rotate this over, and then we'll click there to place it. All right, and if we hit G to grab, that'll move the light over, and we're just going to stick one more light right there so we have a nice bright light. So now what we're going to do is we're going to add some colors or materials to the object. So we're going to click on the object, and then right up here in Blender, there are these different workspaces. So I'm going to click right over here to click on the shading workspace. Now for you, the shading workspace might look a little bit different, but basically there's going to be a 3D view somewhere on your screen, and then there's going to be this kind of gray screen, which is the shader editor. So let's just zoom in here. We're just going to zoom into the pumpkin. And then again, you can scroll with your mouse wheel right up here to look at the settings. And I can click here to go to the rendered viewport mode so we can see what it looks like in the rendered view. So with the pumpkin selected, right up here, we're going to click on the new button, and that's going to add a new material. Now, if you click here on the material, we can just rename it. So I'm going to call it pumpkin orange because this is the orange pumpkin material. So now we have some different nodes here, and we're going to be creating a basic procedural node setup. Now, if you're a complete beginner to procedural nodes, you can still follow along with this tutorial, but I would recommend checking out my introduction to procedural shader nodes. I'll have a link in the video description to that tutorial. And of course, you can check out my Blender for Complete Beginners tutorial series, where we cover all the basics of Blender in this tutorial series where we create the snowman character. So what I want to do is create a gradient. So we're going to have one color down here and it's going to fade to another color up here. So let's click here on the add menu, or you can use the shortcut key, which is Shift A. And we're going to click on the search and I can start to type in gradient. So type GRA and we can add gradient texture. And let's drop the gradient right here. And we can take the color here and we want to put the color into the base color. So the yellow socket here, we want to click and drag to pull out a wire, and we want to stick it here into the base color. So you can see with the gradient, it's going to look darker over here and then white over here. Now I'm also going to be using a built-in Blender add-on, which is called the Node Wrangler. So we'll click here on Edit, and we're going to open up the Preferences. Now on the Preferences, we're going to click here on the Add-ons tab, and then we're going to click here on the Search, and we're going to type in Node by typing N-O-D-E, so type Node, and we're going to click on this Node Wrangler add-on, so click on the check mark to turn it on. And then we will close the Preferences by clicking on the X, so this is a built-in Blender add-on. So with the Node Wrangler add-on turned on, we can press Ctrl-T with the texture selected. So click on the gradient and hit Ctrl-T. And that's going to add the texture coordinate and mapping, and these nodes are basically used to place the texture on the object. Now I'm going to click on the object here and drag out a wire and stick it into the vector, and that's going to use the object coordinates, which is better going to place the texture on the object. So you can see it's black over here and white over here, but I want the gradient to start as black down here and then turn white up here. So we can use the mapping, and there's going to be a location, rotation, and scale to move around the texture. So if I take this rotation Y and turn it around by clicking and dragging, that's going to rotate the gradient. So I'm going to type in 90 and hit enter, and that's going to rotate the texture around, so that way it's black on the bottom and then it's white on the top. And then you can also take this X location, you can drag this around, and you can also hold down the Shift key as you're dragging to make your movements more sensitive. So if you drag this up and down, that's going to basically move the texture up and down because we rotated it. So I'm going to type in on the location X 0.04, just so it's moved down a little bit. Now I want to choose the different colors that I want. So I want to add a new shader node right in here. So you can go to the add menu here to find it, but I'm just going to press Shift A, and then I'm going to click here on the search, and I want to type in ramp. So type ramp, and we're going to add this color ramp. And we're going to drop the color ramp here between the principled shader and the gradient. So when we drop it here in this wire, it's going to plug it through the texture. So this color ramp is going to have a black tab and a white tab, and so we can use these two tabs to control the colors. So if you drag them around, they're going to be either more white or more black, and if you click on the color, you can click here on the bottom color, and that will give you a color palette, so you can drag it to whatever color you want. So I'm going to make this bottom one kind of like a reddish color. Let's make it a nice reddish, kind of orangish. And then if we click on this other color here, we're going to make this one more of an orangey color, so a bright orange. Now you can see it mostly just looks red, and I want to see more of the kind of light orangey color. So if I click and drag this over, you can see as I drag it closer, there's going to be more of that color. If I drag it way over, it's going to be really sharp. And if I turn it down, it's going to be a bit more soft. So there's kind of like that nice gradient. So I'm just going to go with something like that. So it's a bit more red there, and then a bit more kind of orangey on the top, and that's looking really cool. Now, if you want to, you can also drag this roughness around. So if you turn it down, it looks really reflective, sort of plasticky, but if you turn it up, it's going to look really rough. So I'm just going to keep it about in the center. Maybe I could just make it slightly more shiny by turning that roughness down. Now I'm going to click on the other object, so the stem, and we're going to click on new to add a new material, and I can type in stem. And then if I click here on the base color, I'm simply just going to make this kind of like a greenish yellowish color and make it a bit darker. And then on this roughness, if I click and drag, I can drag the roughness up. So maybe I'll turn it to like a 0.6 or a 0.7, so it looks a bit more rough. And then play around with the color. You could go more with like a dark color or a brown color, something like that. So now we're going to click back here to go to the layout, and we'll click on File, and we'll click on Save. So now if I hold down the Shift key, I'm going to shift select both objects. So select one object, then hold down shift and select the other objects. And just how we duplicated the lights, we're going to duplicate the pumpkin. So I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate, and that will duplicate the pumpkin. And then what I want to do is not bring it up and down on the Z axis. I just want to bring it on the X axis or the Y axis. So after I'm moving it, I can hit Shift Z. So Shift Z will exclude the Z axis, and I can kind of bring it forward, and then I'll click there, and then I'll type S to scale, and we'll make it smaller. And let's navigate over here to the side and hit G to grab. We'll drag it down here like that. And let's now press the period on the numpad to zoom into the pumpkin. And I'm going to select the stem, and we'll bring it up on the Z axis. So hit G and then Z to bring it up. And now I'm going to select the pumpkin, and we'll hit Tab to go into edit mode. And then let's hit the A key to select everything. And we're going to scale everything up. So hit S, and we're going to scale everything up on the Z axis just to make it a bit longer. And then what we can do is click here to turn back on proportional editing. And I can hold down the Alt key, and we're going to select that loop right there. So Alt select that loop. And because we have proportional editing on, I'll type S to scale. And you can see we can scale this down. And I'm going to scroll my mouse wheel to change the size of the proportional editing. And we can just make it a little bit smaller. So make it a little bit more flat. Now what you can also do is just select a vertex, and then you can hit G, and that's just going to move it around. So what you can do is just hit G and kind of pull around some of the vertices, and that's just going to kind of make it look more lumpy and random. So it kind of just randomizes the shape of the pumpkin just a little bit. So now if we hit Tab to go back to object mode, we can click on the stem in object mode, and we will hit G and then hit Z and drag it down on the Z axis. And also if we shift select both of the objects, so hold down shift and click on the other object, we can rotate it, and then we're going to type Z to rotate it on the Z axis, and we can rotate it around. All right, so let's make one more pumpkin here. So if we select the stem and then hold down the shift key and select the pumpkin, let's navigate to the top, and we're going to hit Shift D to duplicate, and we can just drag it over, and then we can scale it down, and then we can navigate over here. That's a little bit too small, so I'll scale it up, and I'll just bring it right down there and maybe move it over. Let's hit the period on the numpad to zoom into it, and then if I just select the pumpkin, we can go from object mode over to edit mode. And for this pumpkin, I will hold down the Alt key and then select that loop there in the center, and I'll hit S to scale, which will scale it using proportional editing, and I could bring it in a little bit just to make it a little bit more straight, something like that. And then in edit mode, I can click to select a vertex and hit G to grab and kind of move it around just to make it look a little bit more lumpy and random and different. You could also hold down the Alt key and select a loop there on the top and maybe move it up a little bit to make it just a little bit higher. You can also hold down the Alt key and click to select a loop there, and then maybe bring it down a bit, and you can scroll your mouse wheel just to kind of flatten it a little bit. And then we will go from edit mode to object mode, and we can select the stem and hit G and then Z and bring the stem down. And then if we hold down the shift key and select both of these objects, we can rotate the objects on the Z axis and maybe rotate that around just to give it a random rotation. All right, so now let's click on File and Save, and we're going to click here to go to the shading workspace, so the same workspace that we had before. And now what I want to do is duplicate some of these materials and make the colors look a little bit different. Now, one quick thing that I forgot that I wanted to do, if I just click on one of the pumpkin materials, I want to give this pumpkin material a little bit of subsurface scattering. And subsurface scattering is going to allow light to go through the mesh, and it will make it look just a little bit more fleshy and make it look more like a soft pumpkin. So if we click on this arrow here on the subsurface, I'm going to click on the subsurface type, and I'm going to change this to the random walk skin. And then I'm going to take the weight here and drag it all the way up to 1. So especially if you look kind of on the sides of the object, you can see if I turn up the weight, it just makes it look more soft, and it almost makes it look a little bit more waxy, sort of like candle wax. Candle wax has a lot of subsurface scattering, so I just like that stylized look. So now what I want to do is duplicate some of these materials and make the colors look different. So we're going to select this pumpkin here, and to make this a separate material, we're going to scroll here with our mouse wheel, and we're going to click on this little button here, which looks like two little file icons. So we'll click on that, and that is going to make it a separate material. So it's now called pumpkinorange.001. So if we click on the name here, I can type in pumpkin white. So now it is a separate material, so if I click on these colors and like drag the colors around, you can see it's only going to change this pumpkin, but it's not going to change the other pumpkin colors. So let's click on this tab, click on the color, and I can maybe make it like a bit whiter, maybe a bit of like a like a peachy color like that. So now we have like a cool white pumpkin. And you can also drag this tab around to control the contrast. So now we can click on the other pumpkin, the small one, and we're going to make this one a green pumpkin. Of course, you can make whatever colors you want. I'm going to click on the small pumpkin, and then I will click on this little button here on the materials to duplicate it so that when we change it, it won't affect the original pumpkin. So it's a separate material, so I can click to rename it, and I can type in green. So now let's click here on the color ramp colors, and we'll click on the red, and I'm going to make this maybe like a dark green. So just change the color. And then this other color here, this can be like a light green. So maybe I'll make it a little bit darker though, a little bit more of a gray color. And this one could be a little bit less saturated and a bit darker. And so there we go, we have 3 different colored pumpkins. So let's just click back here to go to the layout so we can see the scene again. And then if you want to like hide the lights just to get it out of the view, what you can do is click on this little button here, which is the overlays, and that's just going to hide the overlays. So we can click on File, and we'll click on Save again just to save the project. So that is going to finish it up for this tutorial. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and thank you for watching. And if you would like to purchase the finished tutorial project files, you can get that for free. I have a free download. Link is in the description, and you can download it for free on my Gumroad store and Patreon page. And if you are a beginner to Blender, then I'd highly recommend checking out my Blender for Complete Beginners tutorial series, where I show you all of the basics of Blender while creating this snowman character. And finally, if you'd like to watch more of my fall and autumn tutorials, you can check out my fall and autumn tutorial playlist, where I have many more fall and autumn tutorials, like creating realistic pumpkins, creating some fall autumn leaves, creating some acorns, and some other fall and autumn themed tutorials. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and thank you for watching.